Hey everybody, it's Ed. Real quick, before we start, I've got some new Patreon supporters I want to thank. Dawn Dennison, Sinjin Eberly, Derek Doran, Nikki Lamagna, Olivia Trim, and Jennifer McKenzie. All these folks signed up via Patreon, which is monthly support, and I greatly appreciate it. There are a lot of benefits that come with signing up for Patreon, including monthly email, discounts at the Mountain and Prairie shop, and a bunch of other stuff. You can go to mountainandprairie.com/support to see all those benefits. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Ryan Busse. Ryan is a Montana-based conservationist, public lands advocate, and former top-performing firearms executive. He's also the author of the new book, Gunfight, My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America, which has received advanced praise from everyone from Publishers Weekly to Senator Jon Tester. Ryan is a lifelong hunter and angler, as well as a proud gun owner, and he brings a unique, nuanced perspective to our country's ongoing debate about guns and the Second Amendment. Gunfight is in no way an anti-gun book. Rather, it's an insider's examination of how and why the firearms industry transformed from being a sportsman-centered business into a politically driven machine that uses decisiveness and fear to grow its profits exponentially. From a broader perspective, Gunfight helped me to understand how we ended up at this bizarre moment in history, a moment defined by anger, misinformation, tribalism, and binary thinking. Ryan was born in western Kansas and grew up on his family's ranch, where most of his childhood was centered around hunting, fishing, and a close connection to the land. After college, Ryan focused his energy on building a career in the sporting goods industry, first working for an optics company and then moving into the firearms business. Ryan found his calling as a gun salesman, and over the course of his career, he helped to transform a small firearms company named Kimber into an internationally recognized brand. But as you'll hear in our conversation, Ryan's advocacy for public lands and conservation created a rift between him and the firearms industry, a rift that eventually exposed the industry's authoritarian power structure, one that does not tolerate independent thinking or deviations from industry dogma. Ryan refused to be bullied or told what to think, and he eventually quit his lucrative job selling guns and decided to tell his story and that of the industry's transformation. The result is his book Gunfight, which we're discussing here today. I was lucky enough to receive an advanced copy of Gunfight, and I was thrilled to have the chance to discuss it with Ryan. We started out talking about his upbringing on his family's Kansas ranch and how his father introduced him to the writings of conservation luminaries, including Aldo Leopold and Theodore Roosevelt. We then talked about his lifelong love of hunting and guns and why he chose to pursue a career in the gun industry. We talk about the exact moment when he realized his personal devotion to public lands was at odds with his industry stance and the unraveling that occurred over the course of the following years. We talk about why gun sales soared during Democratic administrations, the industry's shift from hunting rifles to assault rifles, some very disturbing stories from industry events, Ryan's public land advocacy, the positive influence of his wife, and much, much more. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I learned a lot from Ryan and his book. I appreciate him taking the time to chat with me, and I hope you find it enlightening as well. Be sure to check out the episode notes for a full list of topics and links to everything we discussed. One quick note, I got a little bit loose with my language during parts of this episode. That happens sometimes, but normally my editor, Sam, is able to cut it out, but didn't quite work to cut it out this time. Apologize for the inability to control my language. Hope it doesn't bother anybody too much. I don't think it will, but just wanted to give you a heads up because I normally try to keep it professional. But it was a great conversation. Really appreciated Ryan coming on, and I hope you enjoy. Well, I'm going to say it at the beginning, and I'm going to say it throughout. I love the book. It was awesome. Informative, educational, entertaining, eye-opening. I'm not going to swell your head up too much. 10 seconds into the interview, but I loved it, and I appreciate you bringing me in to chat with you about it. And so I was thinking maybe the best way we could start is just chronologically, because I think it's important for people to understand your unique background, who you are, how you grew up. So can you start out just by talking a bit about where you grew up and how you grew up?
Sure. Appreciate the kind words about the book and being here with you today and being able to share the story of the book. I grew up like a lot of flyover kids, or kids from flyover country. Actually, oddly enough, not terribly far from where you're sitting today. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in northwestern Kansas, just across the Colorado border. So for any of those Coloradans listening, about an hour east of Burlington, Colorado.
Yep.
And I grew up on a large cattle ranch and wheat farm there. I grew up with a shotgun in one hand and a rifle in the other, almost literally. And like a lot of farm and ranch kids, so many of the best times of my youth were centered in and around guns, with, hunting with my father or shooting with my brother or just escaping over the hills with my little .22 and pretending I was a hunter or some sort of villain or whatever. So the things that kids do with guns, it was a very, very healthy part of my life. And when I graduated from college, much like a kid playing baseball who wants to make the major leagues, I thought, well, perhaps I could get into this thing that I love so much, this guns and sporting goods. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky enough to get a job, oddly enough, again, Colorado connection here, Greeley, Colorado, at Busse Optics. It makes binoculars, spotting scopes, rifle scopes, those sorts of things. And a couple of years after I started there, a friend and I hatched a plan. He hatched it, and I joined forces with him to start a small sales and marketing operation for a small fledgling little gun company named Kimber. And we moved to Montana and did that in 1995. And we're lucky enough to play a major role in growing Kimber into one of the largest and most influential firearms companies in the country over the next 25 years. During that time, I was lucky enough to be nominated and awarded a lot of recognition in the industry. I had a lot of street cred. I served as the vice president of sales for more than 20 years, So I have a lot of insights, I guess, and I lived right in the middle of the firearms industry for more than 2 decades at the very highest levels. So I'll stop there. That'll give you a picture of who I am.
No, I think that's great. And I think when people read the book, they'll, you can read on the back, and when they're, your author bio, and it's clear you were very successful, but I didn't fully grasp how successful you were and how influential you were until, really digging into the book and understanding the volume of sales we're talking about here. I mean, it's super impressive. I don't want to get into that more, but back to your childhood. Your dad sounded like a really interesting guy for a lot of reasons, and a really respectable, like kind of a great man. And one of the things that struck me early on in the book is how you talked about he would read books that other people, that a lot of other ranchers at that time were not reading. And, everything from stuff about Theodore Roosevelt to Leopold. Could you talk a bit about that conservation ethic you grew up with? Because as we'll discuss, that conservation ethic is kind of led to one of your eye-opening experiences that led to where we are with this book right now. So, how was conservation a part of your childhood?
You're right about my dad. He did. I didn't find that odd at the time that he was into conservation, or that we had Leupold books laying around, or that Teddy Roosevelt was an icon, or any of those things. I thought that was part of being a decent American.
Yep.
There's a line in the book that I say my dad was trying to patch up our nation's great prairie wound, and I think that's what in his mind he was doing. We had, you drive across the American prairie, which was at one time our Serengeti, and it's obviously been mostly industrialized. And while my dad was an ardent supporter of agriculture, he also, I think, had some deep sort of psychological issue with knowing that what once was no longer, and he was trying to put bits and pieces of that back together, whether it was through ardent support and participation in groups like the Conservation Reserve Program, or just being an advocate for conservation and wildlife at any point that he could. And there was a balance in our lives between making money from agriculture and cattle and crops, and also trying to enjoy the wildlife and wild places and restore those things on our ranch, and essentially in the surrounding area and surrounding ranchers too. And that single thread was the one thing that sort of kept me centered, looking back at it now, through my whole life, even when I became more of a conservative sort of consumer of right-wing politics as a kid, like a lot of kids did in the 80s and 90s. You know, that was the bloom of right-wing radio and Rush Limbaugh. And I spent a lot of hours on a lot of tractors and a lot of trucks listening to a lot of AM radio. And that influenced me in, I think, unhealthy ways. And I got to college and I believed myself to be a contrarian sort of conservative kid who was going to give it to these elites, and they didn't understand us flyover kids. And I was kind of aggrieved, but yet I always held on to that environmental and conservation thread. And eventually that was the thing that got tugged on and then sort of unraveled my whole existence, my political existence anyway. And that happened in Montana many years later. But that environmental thread starting in the Great Plains and my father is sort of what did that.
And I think you do such a great job in the book of laying out kind of this progression of, you know, in those days when we were both kids, you're a little bit older than me, but there was a definite connect that everybody was on the same page when it came with, or not everybody, but most people on the same page when it came to hunters and fish and anglers, and this kind of respect for the outdoors and a conservation ethic. And then as we'll discuss in a little while, there was a kind of a divide, thanks to political nonsense. I learned so much from the book as far as just being able to see this timeline, because it basically all happened during my, you know, from maybe when I was in middle school or high school until present day. And so I was like living through this history, but you kind of get confused by it, or I get overwhelmed with it and I can't keep up with it. And this timeline you lay out was so informative to me. One more question about your childhood. That this is exactly why I love having these conversations with authors, because I can ask questions that aren't in the book. What were you like in high school? Were you an athlete? Were you a troublemaker? Yeah. Did you follow rules? Were you a good student, bad student? Because as a grown man, you've got this real unique combo of being fiercely loyal, extremely hardworking, extremely focused, but at the same time, kind of on the other side of the coin, you're not scared to mix stuff up, and you're not scared to be a contrarian. You're not scared of what other people think. So, I mean, what were you like as a high schooler?
I guess there were probably those seeds that you describe in my childhood and high schooler, but like a lot of small town kids, yeah, I was an athlete. I was a, three sport letter winner, varsity, blah, 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 football, basketball. I did what kids in small towns did. Mm-hmm. I got good grades. I graduated. I don't think I graduated with a 4.0 in high school, but I wasn't far off of that. I don't know that I ever got a C. I don't think I did. And essentially I played, I was on scholarship to play college baseball, which I did and loved and still love baseball very much. And I got good grades in college. And at the same time, I wasn't one that was ever, I was surrounded by a lot of orthodoxy, whether it was, I never missed church as a kid, ever. But I became dubious of all sorts of orthodoxies, things that we were told we had to believe in. Or I guess I'll boil it down to like when I ask a question and somebody answers with, well, that's the way it's always been. Okay, yep. Well, that's something I'm going to doubt. Like whatever it is, that's something I'm going to doubt, or at least I'm going to verify. And I guess that did kind of come to the fore with me, at least through at the end of my high school career and kind of into college and then on into my professional career. So
you get out of college, you go to Greeley, start working in the gun or in the optics industry, I guess, outdoor sporting industry, and you're hustling. Yeah. I mean, you got two different jobs. You're really, it's not like you just step in. It's not like these investment bankers that at age 22 go up to New York and they're making $300,000 a year right off the bat. I mean, you're hustling and it's not a sure thing. Was there a point in your early career when you were like, all right, this is a great career. I've got a talent for this. There's opportunity here, both financial and then just for being good at something, the idea of being a industry leader. When did you realize, all right, there's a really good opportunity for me here?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure I ever realized it.
That's probably why you're good at it. That's why you're good at it, because there's that fire under you, you're nervous.
Yeah, I don't think I ever, even when I was, standing on the stage and being nominated for big awards and being recognized as one of the leaders in the industry, I don't think I ever truly bought that. I never made, our company didn't go public. I didn't cash in. I'm not sitting on piles of stock options and cash and sitting around here now thinking about how I spend my leisure time, like some people are, both younger and older than me. A lot of companies in the firearms industry did go public. People did make millions. Smith & Wesson, I tell the story in the book, it was sold for less than $20 million. And in 2016, its market cap was $1.69 billion. A lot of people made a lot of money on those things. I wasn't one of those. I worked at a small, privately held growing company, and I believed that I, had to prove myself every day, and I still sort of feel that way.
Mm-hmm. I just read this, or I actually listened to it, which I rarely do, a book by Adam Grant, who's a professor at Wharton Business School, called Think Again. And he talks about the importance or all the good stuff that comes from imposter syndrome or being second guessing yourself. And it's, if you haven't read it, I bet you'd like it, as with the people who listen to this podcast. It's just about being curious and being flexible and being able to change your mind, which I think you're a great case study in that. So I want people to buy the book. I want people to read it, and then they can go through all the, the details of your early career. But I kind of want to skip forward a little bit to, all right, you're kicking ass in this business. You're a rising star. You're enjoying it. And then you have this, I don't know if epiphany is too strong of a word, but you're out in the Montana wilderness and you have this experience that all of a sudden puts a little tear in the kind of your, I don't know if you call it loyalty or your obsession or, this great career you've built. All of a sudden there's this little tear in it. And so I was wondering if you could tell that story about when you started second guessing this career you built.
Yeah. So prior to the event, and I'll get to that in just a second, but prior to that event, there had been a couple things that made me start to question the orthodoxy, this sort of police state orthodoxy that I was experiencing and living and frankly kind of helping build in the industry. That you had to believe a certain way, or certain words couldn't be spoken, or certain opinions couldn't be held. In my subconscious, that was rubbing me the wrong way as I look back at it now. But the event that you described, I'm an explorer at heart, and when I moved to Montana, we're blessed with a lot of public land here. I love to bird hunt. I love to fly fish. I love to elk hunt. I just love to be in wild places, and so I took every weekend and just explored new places. I had a personal rule that I would go to someplace known one day and go to someplace unknown the other day. If it was a weekend, that meant I was willing to fail a lot. So if I was looking for a fishing place, I might go to a new creek and it might be a bust. And it might be no fish, no water, whatever. But I was willing to have those failures. And one of those potential failures, I found a place that became my spiritual home, and I just really fell in love with the place. And we eventually, Sarah and I, named our youngest son after the place. It's called the Badger 2 medicine. Our youngest son's name is Badge, and the book opens with a scene with Badge in it. But not long after I started discovering this place and fell in love with it, and it broke down a bunch of my own orthodoxies, because it was the first place that had really ever exceeded my expectations. I had read stories, I had read Roosevelt books, but all the places that were in these, or the experiences that were in these iconic stories, to me, once I saw them or heard about them or knew what they were now or had known that they'd been developed, like they all sort of disappointed me. This place, when I found it, it exceeded everything that I ever thought I would find in Montana, both because it was far more rugged and difficult and challenging than I thought it would be, and because it was less developed and wild and all the native predators that were in Montana in the early 1800s. It's the only place in the lower 48 where they all still existed and with native populations, including I once had a wolverine take one of my front elk shoulders that I shot in this place.
Wow.
So, it's a very, very, very magic place. Not long after I discovered it, though, in 2003 and 2002, 3, and 4, the Bush-Cheney, now referred to as the Cheney Energy Plan, but sort of the closed-door meetings that were going on, that place came under intense energy industrialization targeting by the Bush-Cheney administration, and I was recruited to speak up as sort of this unexpected voice, conservative-looking voice from a conservative industry. So I knew what the press hook was, right? I got recruited by Trout Unlimited and some other coalition, and a couple of guys from Colorado went on this. We did a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where I criticized the Bush administration for targeting these places, including the Rome Plateau, which had not yet been industrialized, the Valvidal in New Mexico. So there were all these things these places that were coming under intense pressure for oil and gas drilling. And I spoke up against the administration. In my mind, just speaking up for hunters, right? This is just a place where we hunt and fish.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the entire industry that espouses to be for hunters and fishermen, why wouldn't they champion this too? And how could I possibly be doing anything wrong by just speaking up for hunters and fishermen in the places we do this? And I think in the back of my mind, I knew I was being pretty naive. But of course, the hounds of hell came down on me after I did that press conference. And that was when trolling was really getting going. The highest levels of the NRA and the NSSF tried to get me fired. Again, not because I was speaking up for hunters and fishermen, but because I dared to criticize the wrong side of the political aisle. And that's when the scales, in and around that time, that's when the scales kind of fell from my eyes, combined with a couple other events prior in the book. And I thought, okay, you sons of bitches been saying that you're for hunters and you're for me and we're all on the same team, and this mumbo jumbo about you believe in conservative or conservation and environmental, that's all fake, isn't it? Right? Because as soon as I speak up for what is one of the most iconic wild places on the planet, you guys come down on me because I'm not towing the right political line. And that was it. Honestly, that was it. I just threw down the gloves and said, we're going now. And from then on out, I've decided I'm going to fight for the places and be an advocate. I'm no longer going to buy into the rules and the groupthink that I've been told to buy into.
And so that's one of the reasons I asked that question about what were you like in high school, because I think most people would be in a situation like that. They would either just be like, screw this, I'm out of here, I quit. Or they would get fired. Like the NRA comes knocking at your boss's door. I would think most people would be kicked out. And the NRA was powerful at that point, and it only increased in power, and you only became more of a thorn in their side. So, I mean, why stay? Why not just say, screw this, I'm going to go get another job. This is brain damage. Why did you stay?
I'm not sure, but a lot of people ask that question. The best I can tell you is that I'm stubborn. I decided, there are several reasons, but why do I have to give up on my dream? Why do I have to let you guys mold or craft what the industry should be? Why can't I do it? Why can't it be this vision? Why can't it be what you said it was? Why do we have to fake people? I'm not leaving. I'm not giving up this turf. You say you own this turf? Bullshit. I own it just as much as anybody else. So there was that stripe in me.
Yep.
There was also the stripe that I realized early on with that first National Press Club press conference that I had the opportunity to do something really good. But as you just described, it would mean I would have to live on this knife's edge precipice for the next 20 years of my life, meaning I had to help build the industry. I had to be prominent in the industry. I had to be successful. And with that, I got street cred, and I could figure out a way to use street cred in unexpected ways to fight for the things that I really cared in. Because as I note in the book, journalists really don't write about dog biting men, dogs biting men, but men biting dogs is a different deal. And here I was turning the table. And it was a precipice that I had to walk, and it was very, very, very precarious. I note many times in the book where, it could have went either way. But I just decided to do that because it was what I cared about. I don't know. I guess I'm not a quitter. I eventually did quit. I eventually admitted defeat, but it took it getting pretty ugly for me to do that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you might, because you got that streak in you that I admire greatly, and sometimes I get in trouble for having a minor league version of that. but I mean, I don't think you quit. I mean, I don't think it's a failure at all. I mean, I think it's an evolution, but I think we can talk more about that later. But there are a few different scenes in the book that, and again, I want people to buy it and read it. I don't want to just go through every page here, but there's two different scenes that keep sticking with me from the book that I can tell it in the way you write it, and getting to know you recently, I can tell it kind of tore you up a bit. And can you describe the scene when you're going into the NRA convention and there's a black security guard that you guys have a moment to that's very uncomfortable? Yeah,
so I will back up a bit here.
Yeah.
In the marketing of this book, and in much of what's been made of it, in much of the criticism that people in the industry have leveled at me, including Donald Trump Jr., who came after me a couple of weeks ago personally over this and other topics, the racism issue has come up a lot, and that's what we're getting ready to talk about here. And I want to be clear, the story I'm going to tell you, not only did I see this happen, I saw things like this happen dozens, if not hundreds of times. The scene that we're going to talk about, though, is also illustrative in that it's very much like the sort of radicalized right-wing politics that we see today, where you and I probably both have a lot of friends who, when you bring up the former guy president, they say something like, well, you people just want to say that we're all racist, and we're not all racist. And I think there is truth in that, but I think there's also truth in the idea that side and these radicalized politics are okay with racism, are okay with it being used, or look the other way at it being used to further their political goals. And I think that's what I saw being developed. And the through line of the book is that this accepting of breaking of norms, of racism, of hatred, of putting all of that on steroids to help sell guns or help win elections, I saw the very beginnings of that. And obviously we saw that used to maximum effect in the last 5 years in this country. And the story to which you refer, at the NRA show, at the NRA convention, the on-floor part of that, where all of us big gun companies have all of our booths, like it's a very big consumer draw. It's almost like a concert, right? It's a huge conference or a huge convention floor with all these monstrous booths, and then tens of thousands of consumers and NRA people NRA members flood the floors to see the guns and meet us gun company executives. And that usually opens at 9 o'clock in the morning. But us gun company executives and the ones that are displaying, we have a special mark on our badge, meaning we get to kind of cut through the crowd, almost like the performer, right, going through the crowd,
yep,
because we're the ones that are going to be on stage. And so this particular day, I walk through that crowd, and the crowd kind of parts for me because I have this badge, and I notice up in front of me, I don't know that he was elderly, but I'm going to guess him at 60 years old, sort of a frail African-American gentleman who I remember him having, I believe, a yellow coat on, he was an official worker at the convention, and he was taking everybody's tickets or, scanning their booth or scanning their badges to make sure they could go in, meaning we could go in early and everybody else had to wait. And there was this sea of people that I was going through, and they kind of represented the typical NRA membership. I think most of them were white, most of them were middle-aged guys. There were some sons in there. There were probably a few wives in there, but most of them were guys.
Yep.
And just as I started to walk in the door, I noticed a big, muscled-up guy. If I had to guess, he probably rode a Harley to the thing, right? That's what he looked like. Tan, muscled up, probably mid-50s, and he was wearing this T-shirt that said, "Don't blame me, I voted for the white guy." And it was in the middle. This was 2012, I believe. So it was in the middle of the Obama administration. And there was a lot of racial angst in and around Barack Obama as a president, certainly. And I believe it was fueled and fostered by the NRA. His shirt was there. There had to have been thousands of people that had already seen it. Maybe they'd given him a high five or laughed. And he and I were both in front of this frail African-American gentleman taking everybody's tickets or looking at their badges. And I remember the African-American gentleman looking at me, and I looked at him, and we both looked at that shirt, and I just froze. I didn't know what to say. I was just sad. I was angry. I was embarrassed, but I just walked through. He scanned my badge and said, "Thank you, sir." And I left him standing there with 1,000 people that thought this T-shirt was okay. And there were a lot of times like that, you know. I don't know what that means exactly, but it really foreshadowed an ugliness in our country. That was 2012. It foreshadowed an ugliness in our country that I think only got much, much worse.
Yeah. No, and I mean, this isn't about me, but I mean, just some context. I mean, I'm from Eastern North Carolina, and I know what racism is. And actually, my grandfather was the mayor of my small town. He was the town doctor and the mayor during civil rights integration. And obviously he was on the right side of that. But I mean, he had showdowns with the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, They would call his house and threaten him and threaten my dad and my two aunts. And, you know, maybe that's where I got, 1% of his stubbornness, because he wouldn't back down from those bastards. And so like, I don't know who's, I really don't know who listens to this, but I lived in Boulder, but I'm not a Boulder hippie. I'm from Eastern North Carolina, and I understand, like, I know the realities of this stuff. And I understand that is a part of the United States, but the thing I don't understand is, like, what does that have to do with firearms? I mean, there are these people that live in the shadows and do this kind of stuff, but I don't understand how that gets mixed in with an organization that used to represent hunters and fishermen. But your book helped me understand that. So anyway, it's very disturbing. And then I think one other part that was very helpful for me was the scene when y'all are at your family's ranch, and that stuff gets me so fired up, like my voice is shaking. When you're at your family's ranch and you're the guy, the journalist shows up with the AR-15, and that's before AR-15s were, this symbol of something other than just a type of gun. Can you describe that and describe what all the gun, reporters and the journalists thought when that scene happened?
Yeah. So one of the points I make in the book is that, much like our modern politics, where I think in the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of people have figured out that our system is pretty fragile, because so much of our country is based on self-imposed norms, lines that we will not cross, things that we know are right or wrong. It's not a system of laws. Mm-hmm. It's things that normal, decent, responsible people just don't do. And I think we've seen that somebody who will break all of those norms, remove all that responsibility, crush all that decency, can have a lot of impact on things. But our system and our people and our traditions are really based on those norms. And I saw the exact same thing developing inside the firearms industry. And an example of that, the scene that you're talking about, there was a time when the industry knew. A lot of people think that AR-15s were made illegal by the assault weapons ban of 1994 to 2004. That's not true. AR-15s were perfectly legal. An assault weapon, as defined by that bill, was illegal, but that just meant that additional features were added to an AR-15. If 2 additional features were added, it became an assault weapon and therefore was illegal. But the AR-15 itself, most people could not tell the difference. Many people could not tell the difference between a pre-ban legal AR-15 and a post-ban illegal AR-15. They just you couldn't tell a difference. When the ban was, and so the industry was very careful not to push or advertise or promote or sort of link arms with this whole AR-15 militarized culture, not because it was illegal, but because norms inside the industry were such that everybody knew it was just a bad thing for society. It was dangerous. It would incite people. There was something about it that was wrong. And so there was this sort of unofficial cadre of wise men, is what I call them in the book, but writers, executives, things that sort of policed our whole industry. They would quietly shout down or make sure that irresponsible things didn't happen, and they would allow the old norms or responsible things to happen. And in 2004, a young kind of up-and-coming writer showed up to an event, a large shooting event, promotional event that we had at our ranch in western Kansas. We called it Southwind, but it became one of the most prestigious promotional events in the industry, where we'd have 20 or 30, writers, sort of this whole cadre of wise men and these co-sponsoring companies, big companies in the industry, ammunition, optics companies. And this guy who was 5 years younger than me showed up, and he brought his own rifle. We didn't know what it was. He unveiled it to shoot out in a pasture. We were going to shoot at prairie dogs, and it was an AR-15. And it was like an audible gasp went across the place. These writers, these people who had been in the gun industry their whole lives, they're basically like, son, we do not use that shit here.
What year was this? I'm sorry. What year did this happen?
2004.
Okay.
2004. So not very long ago.
Yeah.
And it was just there's nothing legal or illegal about it. It's just like, we don't want pictures of that. Put that away. We don't do. And so he was forced to put the thing away. And that was self-imposed. The industry did that, right? Everybody agreed with it there. I mean, it wasn't like checking the law. It was just done. It's just what we did. And that all changed. And so he did, and he shot our bolt-action rifles, and everybody was fine. But that is just an indication of the sort of norms that were in the industry and how we all self-policed them, very much like our politics up until the last few years. In the coming 3 or 4 years after that, that broke down, and the gun culture that you witness today developed in very short order. But there was a time when the industry just didn't allow those things. Again, not because of legality, just because of self-imposed norms.
Mm-hmm. Then one other kind of concept that I got from the book that I think I knew, but I hadn't really solidified in my mind, was a lot of these, the NRA or whoever is so anti-Democrats, anti-Dem. And I'm independent. I own guns. They're not, as far as I know, they're not aiming any of that at me. So, but it's, they just, constantly trashing anybody who's a Democrat, this broad brush. But as your book demonstrates, having a Democrat in office as president is the best thing that can happen for the gun industry. And so during the Obama administration is when this thing really got supercharged. Can you describe that kind of phenomenon?
Yeah, it is a very interesting phenomenon. So there's a couple of things that drive gun sales. Fear of a Democrat being in office and hyping up whatever conspiracy theory that you can about what a Democrat might do to you or your guns. That's the first one. The second one is any kind of unbelievable strife, angst, turmoil in the country. So the one that is most proven, Barack Obama came to be known widely in the industry as America's best gun salesman. That's what everybody referred to him as. In fact, many people in the industry would not utter his name. They would just say America's best gun salesman. And it's because the NRA, as Obama was being elected, in my opinion, they began what became QAnon. And by that, I mean they began to develop and then broadcast, frankly, just insane conspiracy theories. And I think they must have done it sort of like they're going to dangle this out here and see if anybody bites on it. And then they would be like, holy shit, they believed it. Let's try another one. Let's do it even crazier. And so, for instance, as Obama was running, they said Barack Obama, these are literally press releases and ads, Barack Obama is going to rewrite the Constitution. I thought, well, that's odd. Seems sort of unconstitutional for a president to rewrite the Constitution, but okay. Then they had ads that said Barack Obama is going to outlaw hunting ammunition. Well, that's good. And every one of these, I would be like, surely sane people see through this. But no, just like QAnon, where people believed that Hillary Clinton had sex slaves in a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I saw perfectly reasonable, intelligent people in the industry who were lapping this stuff up as if it were truth. And enough people, enough consumers, enough vitriol. And I think the NRA realized, like, oh, man, we got a live one here. Let's run with this.
Yeah.
And they just kept going, and they kept going, and they kept going. And it got ever crazier and ever crazier and ever crazier. And so by the time Obama was elected, everybody in the country was running to every gun store to buy every gun because they were convinced that the black community organizer from Chicago was going to outlaw hunting ammunition or rewrite the Constitution or disavow you of your ability to own a handgun. Like these were literally all ads and press releases that the NRA put out.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I thought, my God, what are we making people do and believe? And to me, again, the through line of the book is that I lived through the seeds of our modern political radicalization. I basically lived on the farm where it was grown, right? And then it was handed off. And I just have story after story after story like that basically is Trumpism. Mm-hmm. So the NRA discovered it, developed it, understood that it was effective, and then they ran with it. And then eventually they handed it off to the Republican Party, who put it on steroids with Donald Trump.
Before reading your book, I was, pretty much on board with what you're saying. And then I read your book, and it just confirmed a lot of things that I was already thinking. But when I'm thinking about different things, I'm always trying to say, like, all right, what am I missing? There's this author I like named Sam Harris that he says he doesn't want to be wrong for one moment longer than he has to. And I've changed. Like if you look at a sketch of me from the early 2000s and now, I've changed, and it's been a very slow, very gradual process with literally tens of thousands of pages of books read. Like I'm always trying to understand, where could I be wrong? And so if you find, say there's somebody out there, and I'm sure somebody who disagrees with this book, just generally, they're like, I disagree with the book. Like, what is the argument there? Like, what is I don't see how, I have a hard time understanding how anybody could have a problem with what you're laying out here and say, like, this is at best case scenario, this is very, very fucking weird, and what am I missing?
So you're not missing anything, but I'm like you. I want to try to be open-minded about what the whole picture looks like. First off, I've had friends and people like you who have read the book and said things sort of similar to what you did. And they say something like, this isn't an anti-gun book, and it has the feeling of something that can't be argued with. And I appreciate that, because that's the way I wrote it. It's not a policy screed. In fact, there isn't even a lot of judgment in it. I'm just describing to you what happened in my life. You're free to make assumptions or draw conclusions, as I do, about what happened in my life, but I don't think you can argue about what happened in my life. It is what it is. And so there's that sort of narrow lens focus on me and my family and my life and what happened. And yes, it's weird. It's like much of it was like living in Stalinist Russia, which it in and of itself is very weird. I think the part that is missing is there any, do progressives / Democrats bear any responsibility for some of the things that happened to me and to us as gun owners and to our country in the way that I described them in the book? And I hit on it a bit. I don't focus on it so much because it wasn't a major part of my life, but I think the answer to that is yes. And so to the degree to which we should be open-minded, I think that the progressives and Democrats often got drawn into this fight, and still do, with entities like the NRA or the Trump administration. And they do it in such a way that they forget the people that they should be standing up for and the people who are being marginalized. So I think by that I mean, instead of, and I try to do this in the beginning of the book, instead of focusing on all of the good things that guns are in our country, and to people like me, and to kids in flyover country, and to people who want to target shoot or self-defend or go hunting, they just sort of dismiss that and go right to the fight with NRA, right? They get sucked into the battle without forgetting who they're fighting for. Mm-hmm. And that only increases that feeling of marginalization by people who feel like they've been forgotten. And, the same could be said in the labor movement or in these other areas of angst in our lives. So if there's one, a second book might be let's focus on how this whole thing made people or made entities, maybe like the Democratic Party or leaders in the progressive movement, forget sort of flyover kids like me, or not focus on the positive things that guns are in their life.
Yeah. And I do want to talk in the final chapter, you offer up some solutions of ways to move forward, which I greatly appreciated. But I think that's important. What you said to keep reemphasizing here is it's not an anti-gun book. I mean, you love guns more than anybody. I own a lot of guns. I'm not a hardcore hunter by any means, but it's an important thing for me. My grandfather gave me my guns, like they're very important to me. And so it's not, I'm not at all, anti-gun, and neither are you. One thing that hit me in your book, it kind of a parallel between our lives is, the influence of our wives, and how it's the best thing we ever did was happen to,
by a long shot.
Yeah. And so, I said earlier about my kind of evolution of thinking and my reading and trying to look at my assumptions from all different angles. And I really credit a lot of that to my wife. And when I met her and just maybe she gave me the confidence to explore new ideas and, kind of called me out on some of my ideas I hadn't thought through fully. Can you talk about your wife's role in all of this?
Yeah. The way I look at this, I guess, is there was a time I got to a place in my life and in the book where I understand that I had to do two things to be fulfilled in my life. I had to do well. In other words, I had to make a living. I had to live a life. I wanted to live in Montana. I wanted to be successful, but I also wanted to do good. So I needed to do well and do good at the same time. But I will say, perhaps early on in my career, I was way too much focused on doing well and not enough focused on doing good.
Yeah.
Eventually, I think I got to a place where I tried to balance them. It was a freaking precarious thing that I don't know if I ever nailed it, but I tried. And I think the thing with Sarah was that I don't think Sarah really ever lost her singular focus on doing good. Doing well to her was ancillary. Doing good was what was important. And she recentered me, kicked me in the shin a few times, slapped me around when I needed it, right? Like, focus on doing good here and don't lose sight of that. And it took a while for her to get that into me, but it was with her assistance and with her continued support on doing good. And that's obviously a theme throughout the book. But yeah, I like that doing well and doing good at the same time is sort of the balancing act.
And I feel like one way that you really contributed in a big way was with Backcountry, and still do, with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And, the people that listen to this podcast, there's such a wide array. Some people, I would guess a large percentage, if not the majority of the people that listen to this are not hunters. Could you talk about what Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is and your role with them over the years?
Sure. BHA is obviously, it's a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. It's not focused on politics. It's focused on it's focused on doing the right thing for wild places, wild animals, hunters, fishermen, those sorts of things. The things that I really care about, and I know that you care about. Over the years, I saw the NRA infiltrate many organizations, and it even created some of its own, where it attempted to say it was for hunters or for fishermen or for wild places, but that's really not what it was for. It was for pulling the street cred of conservation and hunters away from the conservation movement and placing it into the Republican Party or right-wing politics. In other words, they essentially, I think, the NRA has been somewhat successful in tying hunters and conservationists to the idea that you have to be a right-wing Republican. Mm-hmm. That distressed me greatly, especially given my particular experience with knowing that a Republican administration had tried to rototill many of the most wild places in North America, and frankly, they succeeded with a few of them. The Roan Plateau of today in Colorado does not bear much of a resemblance to the Roan Plateau of 25 years ago, sadly, and that happened on Republican watches. And so as I began to understand that tying conservation and environmentalism to hunters and guns was very dangerous because it was degrading conservation and environmentalism. And I didn't want a political movement any which way. I just wanted to be a part of something that just could focus on conservation and environmentalism and hunting and fishing, period. Let the political chips fall where they may. I don't care who we have to criticize or praise. I don't care what party they're from. I don't care how tall they are, what they weigh, what they look like, what their nationality is. It makes no difference to me. Let's just focus on doing the right thing for the resource. And really, that's how BHA came about. It was formed, by some guys in an Oregon canyon around a campfire not all that long ago, and then became a really ardent proponent of just doing the right thing for the resource.
Yep.
Forget the political ramifications. I was actually at the convention, the BHA convention. It was very small in Denver. Gosh, I don't know, must have been now 10 years ago or so. But from that point, I was recruited to be on the board. Then I was recruited to be the chair of the board. Then I was the chair of the North American board. And BHA, during my time there, went from, a small organization of 100 or a couple hundred members and a chapter here and there to an organization now that has tens of thousands of members and chapters all across in almost, I think, every state except for Delaware and most Canadian provinces. And that really wasn't me. It was just an honor to be a part of that. But the staff and the growth and the dedication to wild places really impressed me. And so, yeah, I was there for quite some time, and I'm very honored to have been a part of it, and very proud of the people who are. I'm not there anymore and haven't been for a year and a half. I stepped aside because I didn't want anything that I do personally. I know this is controversial what I'm doing. I don't want it to have any impact on BHA, but I'm quite proud of what BHA does and believe it's a great organization.
I've been so impressed with them from a distance, and I'm not deeply involved in any of their work, but I've. Two things. I work in private land conservation, and I've just been so impressed with how they've been able to, for lack of a better word, market the importance of public lands conservation. And I feel like it's just lacking in the private lands world. And so I watch that with envy. But the thing that's more important is I feel like, as you detail in your book, the NRA and other types of organizations were doing everything they could to tear people apart. And I feel like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, leading the way, did this great work of bringing people together. Because I remember in 2016, 17, when there was all these threats to public land, people were coming together. I always said, like, the Audubon Society and a bunch of bird hunters were on the same page because they understood the importance of public lands, and they could look past their few differences and focus on their commonalities. I remember I was doing a running race in Moab, and I used to get annoyed when people in big Jeeps or whatever would ride by when I was running. And I saw these people ride by in a big Jeep, and I had this great feeling of like, this is awesome, man. We're both out here doing our thing. They're enjoying it the way they want to enjoy it. I'm enjoying it the way I want to enjoy it. We're all on the same team here. And I remember thinking, like, I think I gave Backcountry Hunters and Anglers credit for that in my brain. And I know there are a lot of organizations doing that work, but I don't know. I've been very impressed. I need to get somebody from that organization on this podcast to heap praise on them. So thanks for all your work.
So I think you hit on something. To me, in the world of the NRA, no matter what you do to wild spaces, as long as you vote Republican and are a member of the NRA, you're a conservationist, right? That's not the way I believe. And any Democrat, just because they have a D behind their name, is a demon. They're a tree-hugging, anti-hunting, going to take all your rights away. It doesn't matter what they do. So somebody like Martin Heinrich, senator from New Mexico, who is a friend of mine,
he's great,
hunts elk with his kids and is about as awesome an outdoor person as you could ever want to have in the high levels of the U.S. government. He's a demon because he has a D behind his name. And I simply refuse to believe that. And if they're going to push those kind of politics and destroy conservation and environmentalism through those kind of politics, again, I'm bowing up and fighting it. And that's really the essence of what my epiphany moment back there in 2004. And from that moment forward, I've decided Like, I love this partnership with Patagonia that hunting and fishing groups are starting to forge. If you want to save wild places, if you want to save wild animals, if you want to preserve and conserve what do I care about what you look like or what your politics are? Like, we have a commonality here. Mm-hmm. And the NRA tells us, and the NSSF and firearms world tells us we cannot explore those commonalities. You know what I say to that? Bullshit. Mm-hmm. Bullshit.
I just don't understand such a large percentage of people taking orders from some faceless organization. And I don't care. I'm not talking about the NRA now. I'm talking about anything. I mean, I just I understand you got to be a team player and there's certain things, but at the end of the day, the only thing I have blind loyalty to is my family. And I talk about Sam Harris and I really love so much of what he says, but whenever he says something that I disagree with, I'm so relieved because I'm like, good, I'm not being brainwashed here. Like, I still disagree with this guy on certain things, and that's good. Like, that doesn't mean Sam Harris is an asshole or evil. Like, disagreement is good, and thinking for yourself is good. And again, I'm supposed to be highlighting your work and not blabbing, but it really gets me fired up because the whole point of America is to think for yourself, like form your own opinions, have arguments. And it just seems like everybody is just trying to simplify things to the point of just being brain dead. Am I missing something? Right? Am I missing something?
No. No, I don't think you're missing anything. You sound like me after 2 drinks, and then by the time I have 4, I can really go. But
I've been drinking all morning, by the way. No,
yeah, no, you can't say you've been drinking all day if you don't start in the morning. So I think that the part that is explained and explored in my book is, if you go back to the sort of good parts of my childhood and the parts of guns that are so important to so many people across the country, and I detail how it's almost a religious connection. Like, guns are tools, but they're not tools like a hammer or a screwdriver or something like that. Like, you don't get out your hammer and look at it and think, oh boy, I can't wait for opening day when I get to go hammer on my deck. Nobody does that. But you do with your shotgun, right? A kid with his dad, like, you get out and you clean the thing and, gosh, Dad, I can't wait to take this tool out and hunt with you. In other words, it represents something far deeper in our psyche and our culture than just another tool. And I think the NRA figured out early on, wait a minute, these people have very, very tight connections to these tools, different than a hammer. All we have to do is dream up conspiracies that convince them that some evil entity is going to take them from them, and then they will do anything. They will sacrifice anything. Eventually, they'll even sacrifice our democracy. They'll even cheer when people with AR-15 flags march into the Capitol and try to overthrow a duly appointed election. They'll do anything if we just drum up enough Barack Obama, I'm air quoting here, Barack Obama is going to rewrite the Constitution. Like, do you see how dangerous something that you believe in and you have so much identity in, if you have an entity that convinces you it's going to be taken, then you will do anything. And so once the NRA perfected those politics, that's the same thing that Trump did, right? Trump said, forget about all the corporations that are taking all of your money. Worry about the brown-skinned foreigner who's going to come across and take your job. Oh, wait, my job is something that's my identity. Again, it's the same politics of the NRA. Just take something that you identify with, convince a group of people that they're going to lose it, and then they'll march like crazy. There's nothing they won't sacrifice.
All right, so how do we move forward? How do we fix this? Make me feel good.
So I do think I've been very heartened by a lot of people, you included, who have said very kind things about the book. And the reason I'm heartened is not so much because it's about the words that I wrote, but it's because of the themes that I wrote about. And I think that there are way more people like you and me, and frankly, people that are far right of me. They've reached out. They've written me letters. Yes, my beheading has been threatened. Yes, my boys sit around and tell me there's 150 pages of stuff on the internet about how my body parts should be strategically removed and strewn about the country. Yes, all of that's happening. But what is also happening, and what is very heartening, is people who I didn't expect to be very, very supportive of the book and the ideas, they're out there. they're like, I'm a gun owner, but I can't take this anymore. Thanks for writing this. It's gone too far. Like these are I'm encapsulating long letters and emails and direct messages and everything else, but I'm getting them. And I'm a student of history. I have a degree in history, and I think about how there's sort of a syndrome that happens in totalitarian governments or totalitarian cultures. If you're a reporter that walks through a totalitarian culture the week before it topples, you can't find a single person on the street who says anything critical of the totalitarian culture. Then it topples, there's a coup or whatever, and the next week you walk through and you can't find a single person who is supportive of that old totalitarian culture. And I believe that we are living in a time when there's a lot more people like us, and we're just waiting for a couple things to happen so that we can be the people, so that so many people can say, well, I never believed in all that extremism of the NRA. I think they're out there. I think nobody has stood up and punched the bully in the face. I think that we have this bully. No good idea has to be supported by this police totalitarian culture where you can't criticize it. No, there's no good idea that's ever existed that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what the gun industry is. You literally can't criticize it, or you're excommunicated. That's what Trumpism is, right? You can't say a word critical of or you're excommunicated.
Well, there's stuff like that on the far left, on the very, very edges of the far left too. You know, it's crazy. It's unhealthy no matter what side you're on.
Yeah, those are not good ideas. Good ideas are not supported in those ways. Healthy things are not supported in those ways. So I think that we're coming up to a time when people like you and I can stand up and say, wrong. We're not going to buy into this all or nothing thing. Trying to protect kids with background checks, that's not bad. That doesn't make me evil. That doesn't make me a communist. Just shut up. I'm not going to hear it anymore. I think we're getting close to that. And when that happens, we'll start making some progress. Will it be perfect? No. Guess what? Democracies aren't perfect. They're ugly. They're messy. It's not an all or nothing thing, but we just can make them better instead of making them worse. And right now, I'm worried that gun owners are on a path to making it worse. We're a part of the problem instead of being a part of the solution. And I argue that we have to start being a part of the solution.
You do a good job arguing it. I mean, I think it's very clear. Like I said, you know, I'm always looking for ways to disagree in a healthy way. And I think you laid it out in a way that's hard to argue with, and not in a tricky kind of I'm trying to win a debate way, but just this is what happened to me, and this is what I saw, and this is how we can move forward. So I've told you that a million times, but I admire the bravery to put it out there and just the skill to get it written. Very impressive, man. Few quick questions for you, and then I'll let you get on to more important interviews.
No, actually, I'm going antelope hunting with my boys this afternoon. So
that's
what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's even more urgent to get off. Tell me, you're a student of history, as you said. What are some of your favorite books? Like, what books have helped shape your professional, personal outlooks?
Oh, gosh. So I will tell you right off the bat, I hate favorites. I hate them. My kids, my wife, everybody asks me, like, what's your favorite meal, Dad? We'll have it for your birthday. I don't have one.
That's what my dad says. He's like, everything. I like everything. Yeah, like whatever I ate yesterday.
I did last week. That's what. Yeah. And so I have a hard time. I will say this. I mentioned this book in my book, but a formative, I guess one book that if you care about conservation on public lands and some of this political battle, I think Tim Egan's The Big Burn is just, it's a seminal work for me. It really is. I think another book that I just recently read, it's Empire of Pain. It's about, it's out there right now. It's new. It's about how the opioid industry sort of overtook an entire country. I think that's a similar sort of illustrative story. And he mentions in his book, Patrick Radden Keefe, about all the parallels to the firearms industry and how the opioid industry sort of bent a lot of rules and then changed a country. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very seminal book. Those two are probably about as good as they get, I guess. There's other books that colored me, but I think, purposes of this story, those are two pretty good ones.
I've read the first, but not the second. The second sounds super interesting, and I'm very interested in that whole pharmaceutical business and how they operate. So I need to dig into that at some point. Although I got to cool off a bit after reading your book. I was really, my wife like even knows, she's like, why are you so hyped up? Cause I finished it last night and we can talk offline about that. but so last big question, you've had this, very interesting, very successful career. You're entering a new phase of your career. You love the West. You love Montana. You're a hunter. You're an angler. I mean, we share a lot in common, and I think you share a lot in common with the people that listen to this podcast. You're curious. You're, a kind of a seeker, and you don't take any shit from anybody either. And so do you have any kind of final words of wisdom, parting advice, request of the audience, anything like that?
I guess one of the points I make in the last, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do this, but I'm not asking people to fight my battles. I guess I am asking people, though, to start fighting our own battles. And it's time for those of us who know better to stop looking the other way when Uncle Bob spouts off about QAnon conspiracy theory. It's just not in our best interest to keep allowing that. And I know it's been tough. I know we all have coworkers and we have family and we don't want to have conflict, but we are complicit in our silence. And I tell a story about me standing up, but I became a lone voice in a huge industry. I was the only one standing up against this conspiracy theory. And if we wait until it's just one person standing up against thousands and thousands they're buying into the same hatred and insanity and racism and conspiracy theory, that one person's not going to cut it. Mm-hmm. And so the next time a coworker says something that is obviously driven by irrational hate or anti-science or QAnon or whatever it is, I guess I just ask, find a way to push back. Do it in your own way. It doesn't have to be my way. It doesn't have to be punch the bully in the face thing. It can be constructive and kind and questioning and curious, but don't let it pass. We're letting too much stuff pass.
Well, you're the man. I really appreciate you writing this book. I'm very, very happy to call you a friend now. And I'll look forward to doing this again in person in a few weeks in Denver. But keep up the good work, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for being curious and bringing good ideas to market through your podcast. It's a great thing you're doing.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word-of-mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.